This recording is on Chapter 6, Part 2. This is the follow-up to Chapter 6, Part 1, which you should have listened before listening to this. Um, Again, we're just going through some of the reasons why government may intervene. Okay. Um, in looking at this, the economic relationship with other countries, one of the things that countries track, and it's unavoidable because in order to assess how competitive the country is doing in terms of selling its products abroad versus buying its products from abroad. Okay, so the countries track their own performance to determine one of the things determine if they're selling more or if they're importing more. And then using that justification to impose trade restriction to make their own situation more competitive. These may be uh, current account surpluses when they are selling more than than versus importing more products. Current account deficits, where you're buying more than selling abroad. And they may, in order to balance that out, may impose trade restriction and also provide improve their competitive positions uh, against their current trade partner. We saw this with when U.S. and China, if you look at the current account and long-term historic running of this, U.S. has purchased a lot more from China than China purchasing from the U.S. Okay, and it's been a real problem. I know when Trump was in the White House, he really argued for that, try to make that payment more balanced by asking the Chinese to buy more American products, like more airplane, more agricultural products, and so on. And then also impose trade restrictions or tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the United States in order to force the Chinese to buy more American product and more make the balance of payment, the trade more balanced. Anytime a country is faced with a situation where they're buying a lot more than selling, then it poses a problem in the long run. Okay, it's no different than individual purchasing more than what they are selling. Okay, so on the basis of balance of trade adjustment as one of the argument and for motivation, the government may restrict imports, okay, or find some ways to encourage exports, whether it's through subsidies or for other means for encouraging Canadian or American companies to sell their products more. It could be pressuring their trade partner to further reduce their trade restrictions, or talking to their government and say, look, we are purchasing a lot more stuff from you than you are from us. You've got to start purchasing more of our, say in the U.S. case, more military product, let's say. Certainly not with Chinese, but it could be with other alliance, maybe the Japanese and Koreans. They have also a trade surplus with United States, and one of the ways the U.S. government says, you got to buy more of our products. Okay. In case of China, the U.S. have asked them to buy more of their agricultural product, whether it's beef, whether it's corn, okay, or pigs or chickens or whatever. Okay, so the balance of trade adjustments is one of the primary motivation for government intervening. Okay, another along with this, in order to make that possible, is that it doesn't have to be balanced trade deficit either. In fact, a number of countries that have trade surpluses, say against United States, have been pointed finger. That includes Korea and China comes to mind, but there are other countries as well that the American government have accused them of intervening in order to keep their own um, the value of their money, whether it's yuan or won or whatever it is, that currency of that country, to keep the currency down, okay, in order to make the American products coming in more expensive and their products going into the United States more cheaper. Okay, so there are some interventions by in the monetary in terms of currency exchange. Some of the governments around the world do intervene in order to make their own industries more competitive by keeping their own money cheap. Also, there are other interventions by the country itself through fiscal and monetary policies to bring about lower price increases, okay, in order to be able to sell their products more cheaply and keep their costs down, more sell their product in other countries more cheaply and so forth. So there are very common arguments to argue about their balance of trade. And if that balance of trade is really off kilter, the countries are not going to be very happy about the fact that they're buying more than selling, because it also impacts their employment as well, right? If you buy more from other countries, you're helping that country grow and become more wealthier, and they're helping with their unemployment, etc., at the expense of your own, if that balance is not there. Another typical motivation argument is this comparable access argument. Okay, that is to say, uh, uh, do we have equal and fair and same access to the foreign market as the foreign firms have access to our own market? Okay, it's important. If there is anything in the foreign market that restricts your product going in versus their product coming into your own market, that's a real problem. This notion of fair. If you can sell your goods and services into our country freely without without any restrictions and so forth, we must have equal and fair access to your market as well. And on the surface of it, it looks a fairly good argument to do this, but it becomes unruly, very difficult when you have thousands of products and goods selling back and forth. I mean, how do you do this for all your products, right? It just becomes unruly, very difficult to do, to say this. Now, obvious ones that have an impact that you can point finger at, if a foreign government is clearly subsidizing, let's say, their steel industry so that they can sell their steel products into the United States at a cheaper rate, then that's a clear indications. But for lesser goods, for other thousands of products, it may be more difficult to track and point fingers at. Okay. Another thing is, if you always remember, there's an action and a reaction. If you impose a tariff because you think you don't have the fair access to their market, if you restrict tariff because the balance of payment is off kilter and you're buying more product, there's going to be a reaction from your foreign partner. Okay, because other foreign countries have their own political issues, their own sense of fairness, and they want to protect their own national interests. Okay, so instead of, when you restrict barriers, instead of foreign partners saying, well, you're right, we should lower our trade barrier and give you fair access, it could in fact go the other way. They may act in response, they may act more restrictively, and this escalates, tit for tat escalation, and it just makes the situation even worse and has an unintended consequences. Okay. Again, another is bargaining tools. Okay. Import restrictions may be levied as a means to try to persuade the other countries to lower their import barriers as well, or give them fair access. Again, the danger may be the retaliation and escalation or restriction by both parties. And because as a face-saving measure, it may be very difficult for them to back down. Uh, okay. Uh, Another way to do this is to control pricing. Now, American government have used, like I said, with appliances made by Samsung and LG. They've also done it in the past with steels coming into United States to argue that they have to take anti-dumping measures. That whether it's Korea or China or any other country, that they are dumping their products. Dumping implies that they're selling below cost, okay, or to deal with their excess inventory to dump it, okay, and and so they impose tariffs accordingly. But this is really tricky because they might use that argument, but for a very different reason. They may use that argument, but in fact, what they're trying to do is to protect their own industry that is inefficient and perform at a more costly, producing products that are more costly, and basically that their own domestic companies that cannot compete effectively and efficiently. Okay. Uh, another price control objective is countries may withhold products from international market in order to raise the world price so that they can make more money off of it. Okay, and clearly, uh, OPEC is one of the organization of petroleum exporting companies. All the countries that belong to OPEC, by restricting oil, they can artificially raise the value of the thing, and so forth. Some of the non-economic reasons that have been, and we've seen this in the last few years, particularly with rise of nationalism, whether it's in China or United States. We saw this with coronavirus, where the access to supplies become limited. Okay, so some of the non-economic rationale for countries to intervene in the trade, it could be maintaining essential industries. Essential industry argument states that government applies restriction to protect its own essential domestic industry so that the country becomes less or does not become dependent on foreign sources of supply, especially say during war, during conflicts. It doesn't have to be a physical war anymore. It could be just a political friction with the trade partner. Okay, so any essential domestic industry, like this, we need it. And if there's a conflict, and if the foreign suppliers won't sell it to us, we're going to be in serious trouble. Okay, we need these industries. Okay, now with coronaviruses, the argument can be related to medical equipments. Okay, a lot of the medical equipments were produced in other countries, whether it's in China, whether it's in Germany. But when the coronavirus started to spread globally, every country acted to protect their own people. And they're not going to sell you the products that you need to save your own people. Okay, so essential industry, by designating industries and companies as essential, they've been able to protect those. Now, the side effect, the negative side effect of this, however, is that it may lead to higher costs, because assumption is your own domestic companies could not compete effectively, and they need protections and shelter because you're not as cost effective as foreign companies. Therefore, if you as a country prohibits purchasing of foreign products and only domestic products, that could lead to higher cost, which in itself may have political consequences. Because the definition of essential industries have been used and abused. Now, if it's truly essential, then it's obviously, um, it has to be done. It's important. But if that argument is used to simply to protect some of your political interests and your constituencies, that could lead to higher prices and inefficiencies. Okay. Another argument, promoting acceptable practices abroad. Any group of countries that's concerned with security and use national defense argument to prevent export goods and services is also have been an argument that's been used to restrict exporting some of the sensitive products and know-how. U.S. has certainly used that against China when they restricted some of the products that are used, including software that are used in Huawei smartphone and smart watches. The argument is that they may be used for dual purposes, not only civilian but for military use as well. Okay, and the argument is we will not sell any sensitive products and know-how to other countries. It could be clearly not to enemies, but it could also be against the friendly partners. But any of these arguments, essential industries and acceptable practices abroad, where you will not sell any sensitive equipments, can also be used to pressure other countries to yield to your own national agenda, whatever that may be. Another argument is maintaining or extending spheres of influence. To maintain their spheres of influence, government may give aid and credit and encourage imports from countries that have joined their political alliances or they have voted in concert with their own national interests, say in like United Nations. But it's a way they use trade restrictions to reward and punish those that does not go along with what you want. Okay. There is an argument. There's a group called Quad, where it compromises of Australia, India, U.S., and Canada. U.S. appears to be trying to develop strategic alliances in and around China in order to counter rise of China. And we hear this in the news very commonly. There's an implied trade threat by United States. Oh, by the way, that Quad is Japan, Australia, India, and U.S. and potentially other members. There's another group called Five Eyes, which includes Britain, Canada, Australia, U.S., and another country I can't. But these are there seems to be they had difficulty with this under Trump because Trump was kind of go it alone kind of guy and make America great again kind of guy. But with Joe Biden as the current president, their strategic alliances, he's very more diplomatic and has more expertise in developing strategic alliances with other countries. And so he's worked on a number of alliances that is meant to counter China and to some extent Russia as well, if you look at the European theater. And the implications are this extending spheres of influence, maintaining spheres of influence, is that if you do go along with United States, if you support U.S. agenda with this, that the trades may be more favorable with strategic alliances. Okay, it's basically if you're our friends, we'll treat you better. If you're not, then so forth. So there's some varying level of degrees that's going on where it's almost become purely political. U.S. does that. China does that to in a very aggressive way now. Okay, if you question some of the sensitive political items related to China and what China deem as an internal matter or internal issue, there is a quick response from the Chinese in terms of trade restrictions. In trade, as I said before, they will not say, "Well, we're not going to buy this." What they'll do is they'll put up enough tariff and non-tariff barriers, like strict customs control, where if you try to sell your product, they won't tell you face like we're not going to buy your product. What they'll say is like you need to do a lot of paperwork. You have to follow through these regulations. Basically, you get buried in paperwork. Okay, and there's a constant delay in allowing the products to come across the border, and this is particularly true if you're selling commodities like Apple, perishable goods. If there's any delay, that container full of these perishable uh, goods no longer becomes. Or if you are, let's say, a foreign bank operating in China, they impose strict regulations. They send auditors, they send government officials to constantly monitor to see if they're following everything by the letter, and any mistakes they're called for. So some of the ways that you can create trade restrictions are more subtle. That is to say, it doesn't have to be like we're going to impose 35% tariff on your product. It could be more backroom subtlety that makes your life so difficult and create bureaucracy. It may as well be a trade restriction. And we've seen that as well. Because as part of World Trade Organization, both US and then China are, you can't prohibit free flow of goods. You have to have some reasons. Okay, so sometimes it's not frontal approach, but a more subtle approach by making your life so miserable that you don't want to sell anything to that country. There are a number of items. We're coming to the end. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there's the chapter specific talks about instruments of trade control, like the tariffs and various variations, various type of tariffs. And also they talk about some of the non-tariff barriers. They talk about these, whether it's regulations, administrative regulations, or policies or procedures, or they also talk about subsidies, where you may not restrict a trade of foreign goods and services coming into your country, but you can enhance your own domestic companies' ability to compete by subsidizing them. Subsidizing through government outright loans, okay, or aids, or research and development fundings, or tax breaks. I mean, there's so many ways that government can subsidize its own industry, okay, so that the company can produce its goods and services more cheaply than their foreign competitors. Okay, so anyway, have a look at those, and this ends part 2 for chapter 6.